Today we're going to sew up this super cute double peplum top with a puff sleeve. Super cute for summer. Perfect for that warmer weather that's here. And even if you're not sewing along today, you're going to learn lots of tips and tricks for working with stretchy fabrics, knitwear. So you're definitely going to want to follow along so you can get all those tips and tricks. So let's do it. Let's start working on this peplum top. So you're probably wondering, what kind of fabric should I use for this double peplum top? Well, I would suggest a lightweight, stretchy fabric. Right here, I have a silk jersey. Love it. It's got some really great stretch to it. You could even use a bathing suit spandex and make this top to match one of your bathing suit bottoms. How fun would that be? But you can also use a stretch lace like you saw in my sample earlier. They look great in stretch lace. You can also just use a plain jersey cotton fabric or even like a ponte knit. You can use a sturdy knit for this pattern as well. So you've got a lot of options for different types of knits that are going to work great for this pattern. After you have your fabric selected, you need to print out your pattern. And so you can print it out on your home printer, cut it, tape it together, or you can download that large format version and send it to a copy shop. Once you've printed your pattern, you need to cut out the paper and then lay it out on your fabric. And don't forget, you gotta follow those grain lines. So you'll notice I have my fabric folded, and that's because your center front and your center back are going to be on fold, and all of your peplum pieces are going to be on fold too. So you need to make sure that you're folding your fabric. And you'll notice I don't have it folded directly in half because that would mean I would just be cutting out giant holes in the middle of my fabric. So I've folded the fabric just as wide as my pattern, so that way I can use my fabric efficiently. And if you are using a stretch lace like that white peplum top I showed you earlier, you need to really watch the stretch on it. So a lot of times stretch lace is actually going to stretch perpendicular to the grain line, so the opposite way. So when you lay out your pattern in stretch lace, you are not following that selvage on the edge of your fabric. So always stretch your stretchy fabric and make sure you're laying out the pattern so that way the stretch is going across your body. I've cut out all of my pieces for the double peplum top. Let's go over all the pieces so that way you can make sure you have them all cut out. You should have 2 small peplums, 2 big peplums, 2 puff sleeves if you're doing the puff sleeve version, 2 bands for the puff sleeve, 1 front bodice, 1 back bodice, and 1 neck band. And those are all the pieces for the double peplum top. We are ready to start sewing. Speaking of sewing, if you're looking to improve your sewing skills, make sure you check out my online sewing school. There's a link for that down below. And if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Now let's get back to finishing up this top. Today, I'm going to be using a 4-thread serge to sew this together because it's a knitwear. But if you don't have a serger, you can still sew this top together. You just need to make sure you're using the right stitch. And whatever you do, don't use a straight stitch. It's gonna pop and fall apart. So make sure you're using your lightning bolt stitch, or what they like to call the stretch stitch. And if your machine doesn't have that little lightning bolt stitch, you can use a very, very narrow zigzag stitch that'll still allow your fabric to stretch. Now, speaking of the stretch fabrics, all stretch fabrics are different in stretch, so make sure you test out your stitches on a scrap piece of fabric first and stretch it and make sure it's still stretching and not popping. If it's popping, you need to change your tensions. So grab your bodice pieces and place them right sides together. And let's serge the shoulders and the side seams together. Let's go over our settings here on the serger before we start serging. So I have my machine set up to a 4-thread overlock. I have my differential feet at 1 and my stitch length at 2.5. I'm going to start with serging the shoulders together. And as you can see, my serge is still nice and stretchy and it's not popping. And now onto the side seams. So now we essentially have a little crop top. Our shoulders are sewn together and our side seams. This means you could also use this pattern as a crop top pattern. If you were gonna make it as a crop top pattern, you could just put that neckband on and turn under your edges, and there you go. Tank top, crop top. Our next step is going to be placing the half circles on top of each other, which are our peplums. and we're going to be serging together the straight side. So the straight side here, and then this little straight side here. And you're gonna do it for the small peplum and the big peplum. When I'm serging the knit, I really like to hold it in place and double check those layers and make sure they're nice and lined up. So now you should have a little circle and a big circle. Now that we have both of our peplums sewn together, we're gonna place the little one on top of the big one. Now you can change up this style and maybe just do the big one or just do the small one. Totally make this shirt your style. This pattern is basically 5 styles or more in one. Now what we wanna do is line up the side seams of the peplum so that those are right on top of each other. And now we're gonna take the side seams of the shirt and we're gonna match all these up. So we're gonna make sure we place everything right sides together. And let's start clipping at the side seams. So the trickiest part of this is just keeping everything nice and lined up, because now we have 3 pieces of fabric that we are lining up. So clip that side, and now we're gonna come over to this side. And a little trick I like to do to keep everything flatter is have one seam facing to the right, one seam facing to the left, and kind of zigzag them. That way it's gonna make it less bulky. Because if they're all pushed to one side, it's gonna be real bulky on one side. And now what we wanna do is put some more clips in here. So go ahead and line up all of these layers and clip them together. If you are using a serger, you wanna make sure that you're using clips because you do not wanna get that pin accidentally in the serger. You will destroy your blade. If you are sewing this on a regular sewing machine, you can definitely use pins. So we have one side clipped, and now we're going to do this side here. So you can see how all those layers want to naturally just separate away from each other. So we just have to carefully grab them, line them up, and clip them together. There we go. So now we are all clipped up. We have all 3 layers together, and now it's time to serge all 3 layers together. So I have all 3 layers here lined up, and when you get to the seam with the serges that are hanging off, you're just gonna chop those off with your serger. Nice thing about the clips is they're so big, there's no way you can accidentally try and get them in the machine. They're very visible. Sometimes when I'm doing multiple layers together, you'll notice that I cut off just a little bit, just to really make sure I am catching all 3 layers here and evening them out. But I'm never cutting off a lot. It's just like a little sliver here, a little sliver there. When you get back to where you started, you're going to overlap your stitches by about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch and then serge off. So overlap those stitches and then serge off. Let's take a look at that seam with all 3 layers, and then I have some tips for securing those thread tails. After you create the seam with the multi-layers, you always want to take a look at every layer and just make sure that it caught everywhere, because there's a chance that it slipped on one layer and not the other. So you're just going to work your way all the way around the shirt and just keep checking all of those seams. Once you've checked your waist seam, we are good to go to secure that thread tail. So grab that thread tail where you overlapped it inside of your shirt. And I'm going to give you 3 ways to finish this off. So 1, you could cut it. Because we overlapped this 1 inch, it's not really going to fall apart on you through wash and wear. It'll last a very long time. But if you're worried about it, you can take this thread tail, pull it back into the seam allowance, put on your zigzag stitch, and just zigzag it down to the existing seam. And then you can cut off the rest of the thread tail. Or what you can do is take some wax. It's just some beeswax here. Wax the end of it, make it a little sturdier to get through the end of a needle. And then you're going to take a tapestry needle and you're going to put this serge tail through the tapestry needle. And then what you're going to do is take the needle and you're just going to run it right along the top of the serge for maybe an inch or so, and then go ahead, pull that out, and then you can cut the end there. So it's a really nice way to secure that thread tail without cutting it off so it doesn't fray, and it's going to end up right inside of that seam. It's like magic, it just disappeared. Now that the double peplum is attached, let's tackle the neckband. So grab that really long rectangle. The short ones are going to be for your puff sleeve. The first step for the neckband is taking it, laying it out nice and flat, and fold it right sides together. So that way the two short sides are lining up. And then we're going to serge the short side together. So now I have that side there serged together. And now what I'm going to do is take it and fold it wrong sides together. So that way we get a nice finished print on both sides. So that seam there is going to be encased inside of the fabric. Once you have your neckband folded in half, it's time to attach it to the neckline. Now, the neckband is shorter than the neckline on the shirt. So we need to make sure we're stretching it and pulling it the right amount. So I'm going to give you some tips to make sure it turns out beautifully. You're going to need a marking tool for this next step. So grab one and let's do some marking. So I want you to take your neckband while it's folded in half and make sure the seam is on one end. And when the seam is on one end, keep it nice and flat. And I want you to mark with your chalk directly across from that on the other side. So one mark is going to be our seam, and then there's one mark directly across from it. Now we're going to match those two. So we're going to match the mark with our seam. So now I have that mark matched with the seam, lay your fabric nice and flat, and now we're going to mark the other two ends. So essentially what we're doing is we're quartering it. So we want to make sure we have an even distance here marked out. Okay, so now I have 4 spots marked on my neckband, one on the center, we have some on the ends, and then that seam on the other side is my other mark. Now we need to quarter the neckline. And we're doing all of this so that way our neckband is going to be evenly stretched out around the neck of the shirt. So now we need to quarter the neckline here. And you might think, well, it's the shoulders and center front and center back. Well, it's not, because we don't have the same distance in the back as we do the front for the neck. So what we need to do is choose a shoulder that we want the seam on the neckband to line up. I'm going to line it up with the one on the right. So what that means is I need to walk the fabric around the neckline without pulling it. Make sure you do not pull your knit fabric. Just walk it, which means line it up edge to edge. And when we get to the end where they match up, see there's the shoulder, this is going to be our other halfway point. So we're going to put some chalk there. And now what we're going to do is match those two spots. So I've got the shoulder seam on one side with that new notch that I just made. And now when we hold those two together and we walk our fabric to the end on this side, we're going to put a mark. And then we're going to do the same thing for the other side. And then we will have 4 spots marked out on our shirt for quarter spots. And now that we have both of those in quarters, it's time to line them up. And I find that that method is the easiest to get it quartered real quickly and real evenly. What you could do is also measure the neckline and go ahead and divide by 4 and then put spots at all of those measurements. And you could do the same thing for the neckline. Just measure it and divide by 4 and then space out your little notches. But I find just folding it and marking it works great. So we're going to start with the shoulder seam that we started from when we quartered. Then we're going to start with the seam on the neckband. So we want to line those up. Make sure you're placing right sides together. And when we do this, all 3 of the raw edges are lining up. So what we need to do now is find our next notch point, our little mark, which is right here and right here on the band. So go ahead and line those up and make sure your band is nice and flat and you're not stretching one layer more than the other. If that happens, you're going to get a twist in your neckband. So if you notice a twist in your neckband after you sew it, there's a good chance that these layers were not flat and one was stretched out more than the other. So we're just going to work our way around to all those points. So there's my next point up here, and there's my next point on the neckband. So we have one more to line up back here. And now we have all 4 spots clipped together. Now that we have those 4 areas clipped together, it's time to go serge all 3 layers together. Now that neckband is smaller than your neck, so you are going to need to stretch it out in between each spot that you have clipped. So we're lining up all 3 layers. We are starting at that shoulder and you are going to stretch it. And when you stretch this, you don't need to fully stretch your knit fabric. You're just stretching it to fit. So you just want to work your way up to your first clip, making sure all 3 of those layers are nice and lined up. Once you get up to that first clip, grab your next clip and then remove this one. And you can see here I have more shirt than I do neckband, but not a ton, but enough to where I do need to stretch this just a little bit to flatten them out to make them match. When you get back to where you started, overlap that serge by about 1 inch and go ahead and serge off. Leave yourself a nice long thread tail so that way you can secure it. Now that you have the neckband sewn on, it should look something like this. And make sure you secure that thread tail. You now know 3 ways to do that. Look how nice and even this neckline is. That quartering method really turns out great. So now what we want to do is add a little edge stitch around the neckline to really help this lay flat. So we're going to be stitching on the seam allowance, facing it down towards the shirt, and we're going to stitch 1/8 of an inch away. For my edge stitch, I'm going to be using the stretch stitch at the center position. I like to call this the lightning bolt stitch because it looks like a little lightning bolt. It's basically a straight stitch and a zigzag merged together. So that way when you stretch your fabric, it's still going to stretch and it won't pop. For this step, you can actually use a straight stitch as well, and it still works around the neckline because it's not a seam that's going to stretch. So either use your zigzag stitch or you can use a straight stitch for this. If you really look at the stitch, you can see it looks like a straight stitch, but it's actually on a little bit of an angle, allowing this fabric to stretch still. So cool. Now we're gonna move on to those puff sleeves in this stretchy knit fabric. This is probably the most difficult part of the whole shirt, so make sure you follow along carefully. To get our puff sleeve into our shirt, the first thing we need to do is run 2 rows of basting stitches along the top of this sleeve here. So it's gonna be this big part that bumps out. The small part at the bottom is going to be for the bottom of our sleeve. So 2 rows of basting stitches right at the top. When you start your basting stitches, start them about 2 inches away from that underarm seam, and then make sure you end them about 2 inches away from the underarm seam on the other side. So I'm starting 2 inches away from the bottom, and I'm running my first basting stitch 3/8 of an inch away from the edge. And I also have a ballpoint needle in, so make sure you put a ballpoint needle in so your stitches aren't skipping and it's taking the knitwear nicely. So I'm about 2 inches away from the end, so I'm going to stop, lift up my foot, give myself enough thread, and now we are going to add our second row of basting stitches. So I'm just going to line up the edge of my foot with that last row of stitches there and work my way all the way around. When you get to the end there, lift up your foot, give yourself enough thread, and cut. So now we have our 2 rows of basting stitches in the top of the sleeve. So you should have those 2 rows of basting stitches in the top of your sleeve, and you can see they're real big, so got that really long stitch length there. And right here it's a little uneven, doesn't even matter because we're gonna take these out later. They're just to help us evenly gather up our fabric. So after we have those basting stitches in there, we need to take the sleeve, fold it right side together. We're going to serge together the underarm of the sleeve, which is a straight little edge right here. So I have my seam together right here, and now it's time to gather. So now what we're going to do is take our 2 top threads, we're going to hold them, and then we're going to take our fabric and pull it down the threads. So make sure you're pulling the fabric and not the threads. We're going to get this nice and gathered here up at the top, and then we're going to start clipping it into our shirt. When you gather this up, you want to make sure that all your gathers are in the top of the sleeve up here. So go ahead and fold your sleeve in half by folding it at the underarm, and then go ahead and work your gathers up to the top of the sleeve. To put in the sleeve, we want our shirt inside out, and we want one of the armholes. Our sleeve is symmetrical, so there's not a front and a back. You need to make sure your sleeve is right side face out, and we're going to put it into the armhole. And the first thing you want to line up is the underarm seam. So the underarm seam of the sleeve with the side seam of the shirt. Go ahead and clip that. And now what we're going to do is clip our sleeve in. So remember, you don't want any gathers in the armhole under your arm here. We want all the gathers up here at the top of the sleeve. And the nice thing about the basting stitches is that if you need to gather it a little bit more or let out a little bit of the gather, you totally can. You just move your fabric around on those basting stitches. And if your threads are real long, you can go ahead and cut some of those off right now. So we want the underarm of the sleeve to lay in nice and flat. And then just make sure all those gathers are up at the top, and you are going to be golden. There we go. So I have my sleeve clipped into the armhole, and you can see I have all of the gathers at the top of the shoulder. And now we're gonna serge the sleeve to the armhole. I'm starting towards the underarm seam of the shirt. And we are just going to serge all the way around this armhole. The trick to sewing in a circle is serging a little, then stop and rotating all your fabric. So I've serged a little, and now I'm going to rotate all of my fabric. Ooh, we're getting up to the gathers. So you are going to serge over all of these gathers here. Just make sure they all stay nice and horizontal, perpendicular to the seam you're creating. Again, overlap your stitches and then serge off. So our sleeve is sewn in. Let's take a look at it. So we have our sleeve completely sewn in. We still have our basting stitches there, and we can take those out. So if you go ahead and just get a little bit of a thread tail started, you can usually pull these out real easy. If they're not coming out of your fabric real easy, you want to make sure that you use a seam ripper to take them out, because you don't want to rip any of the fibers of your fabric. So go ahead and get those basting stitches out of there. We are done with them. And look at how awesome that looks now that we have the basting stitches out. All those gathers are radiating out right from the shoulder. The next thing we need to do for the sleeve is put in our sleeve band. So the sleeve band is a perfect fit into the bottom of the sleeve. So just take it, fold it right sides together, go ahead and serge up that side, and then you're going to sew it into the bottom of the sleeve. So I serged together my band in half, and I've folded it wrong sides together. And you can see that it's the same length as the opening of my sleeve. So we're gonna flip it back so that way our right sides are together, and we've got all three of the raw edges together. And then I'm going to clip it at the underarm here so this stays nice and lined up. And then we're gonna serge all three of these layers together. So I have my armband all clipped in here to the bottom of my sleeve, and there's no stretching involved here because it's the same size as the bottom opening of the sleeve. Remember, when you're serging in a circle, serge a little bit, stop, rotate, and make sure nothing's caught under your serger. Overlap your stitches and serge off. Our band is on and our sleeve is looking super cute. Let's take a look at it. Our band here is looking great. Look at that. We got all of our stretch in there. We've got our puff sleeve in. So cute. We got our little gathers in the back too. So we're right in the middle of that shoulder. Gorgeous. Now we just need to put in our other sleeve. And you're going to do it the exact same way. We have both sleeves in and it is looking so good. So now what we need to do is finish the bottom of the peplums. I'm going to be using a baby rolled hem to finish it in this blue color because I think it is going to contrast it perfectly with this print. And if you don't have a serger, you can totally just do a single folded hem, fold it up a 1/4 inch and stitch it down. Or if you have a cover stitch machine, you can totally cover stitch the hem of this. And just make sure it's a nice narrow cover stitch because we're hemming a circle. So we can only trim that up just a little bit. So now let's go baby roll hem these 2 layers of the circle on the serger. And we're done. We did it! We finished our double peplum top with a puff sleeve with cute little bands around the neck and the bottom of the sleeves. Wasn't that fun? And we went over a lot of little tips and tricks for sewing with knitwear. So hopefully next time you're working with a knitwear garment, it is that much easier to sew up. And it looks great on! Check this out. I just love this puff sleeve with the band here. Just like the shirt here to the left of me. And then the one here to the right is just the set-in sleeve version that has the flutter sleeve. So there's also that sleeve option in the pattern when you download it. I really love the fit of this shirt. Because it's knit, it is so nice and easy to wear. Just kind of throw on and go. It's very casual. You can wear it with jeans, shorts, a skirt, etc. Or like I was saying earlier, make it out of bathing suit fabric and wear it with your bathing suit bottom. How fun would that be? And if you sew up the double peplum top, I would love to see it. So make sure you tag me in your photo or just email me one over. And I would love to share it with everyone else. I really love this pattern for summer because there's so many tops you can make out of this one pattern. You can make a crop top, you can make a short peplum, you can make a long peplum, you can do a flutter sleeve, you can do a gathered sleeve, and you can mix and match all of those options together. So really, you have at least 5 different top options here in this one pattern. So fun! Let me know what sewing pattern you want to see next down below in the comments. And thank you so much for watching today. And make sure you like and subscribe to Sew Anastasia and hit that notification bell so you know when the new videos come out. And don't forget, I now teach sewing classes online. There's a link for that down below in the description. And if you're in Chicago, come on into the design studio with me and take some sewing classes. There's also a link for that down below in the description. And don't forget to follow me on all the socials. That way we can stay connected and creative together. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!